Boldwood presents The French Girl, written by Kathryn and read by Anna Bentink. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Ulverscroft and Boldwood present The French Girl, written by Kathryn and read by Anna Bentink. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood.
Prologue 1945. Nell. The turn of the season greeted her that morning as she left the house and walked the lane that hugged the side of the valley. She stopped still for a moment, listening, breathing in the first earthy trace of autumn. Mist, caught at waist height between the beeches, where the little river glided, was vaporous, drifting like phantoms, drifting like her memories. On the horizon, above smouldering golden woods, the hills were sleeping. The summer season clung on, the earth still warm, the sky empty. The war was over, and the planes had stopped coming. A red-brown kite had the clear blue to himself. He wielded his wingspan, testing the air high above her head. His cry like that of a frightened child. She stood there and took her fill of Ledna Valley, all that was familiar, everything that was her home. She thought of the people who had come here, and then had gone. The people who had disappeared, as was the custom in war, like waves from a beach, like clouds from the sky. She thought of cousin Sylvie, and then of Alex. He walked through her mind, steadily and inevitably, a passing, tangible sweetness. The memory of her happiness teased and haunted her, then left her alone. She turned around and made her slow way back to the house. Her footsteps crunched along the gravel drive that wound its way home. The late rose, clinging to the red brick facade, dropped its last baby pink petals like tears. Her Alsatian, Kit, was waiting for her on the step. He raised his head to watch her approach. Just inside the front door, packed and ready, was her battered suitcase. The one her mother had bought her from Peter Jones before the war. She lifted her hand, and the dog, as she made her way around the west wall of the house, where a honeysuckle rambled, exhaling perfume. She wandered inside the walled garden that had been named by her father for the end of summer flowers that colonized its four quarters. Globes of dahlia rose above golden chrysanths. The sunflowers, ruddy brown and gigantic yellow, were on fire. Nasturtiums and snapdragons crowded the beds, while butterflies, early risers like herself, bobbed over them like tiny beacons. Here, in the sharp slant of the sun, the garden was bedraggled and overblown. The other day her mother had described it as rampant, referring darkly to the fact that no longer was her father, or indeed any man, around to tend to it. Even so, she relished the peace and the familiarity of the garden, the September garden. The crooked apple tree was plump with russet fruit, and the brambles heavy with black jewel berries. She plucked a berry and popped it in her mouth. It was sour, unexpectedly so. She had been persuaded by cousin Sylvie to accompany her back to Normandy, and last night she had packed her suitcase with a resentful and reluctant drag. She and her cousin had barely spoken in the last 4 years. The idea of this trip was disturbing and provoking, she thought, to say the least. And what of the icy bitterness, the painful breach between them? In the chill of this first morning of autumn, contemplating the journey back to the place where her cousin was born, she knelt down in the September garden, in the corner where the big-faced daisies grew, and began to shiver. Kit shuffled onto the ground beside her, his flank heavy against her ankle. He let out an elongated sigh that sounded almost human as he rested his snout on his paws. She felt her dog watch her as she pulled some weeds away to expose a little patch of short turf. The ground, she noticed, had sunk a little. Some sort of marker, a gravestone, was needed. Something had to be done. The taxi hooted at the front of the house, and she glanced at her watch. Blunt sorrow burrowed down inside her, fixing her to the ground. She stayed there, crouching, hiding her face with her hands. Kit wriggled, shifting himself closer. She pressed her hand to the strip of grass. It felt springy, alive. She whispered to it, to the patch of earth. "It is time to go." Her tears incapacitated her for some moments, ripping her body apart. When at last she could speak, she said, "My little boy, I promised I'd never leave you again. Not ever. Not until I die." Her voice cracked at the back of her throat. "But sleep well, this time. And I promise you I will be home soon." Nell got up and walked away from the unmarked grave, glancing back just once over her shoulder. "I will be home soon." Part 1, 1938 to 1939. Nell. She squeezed the brakes and came to a halt at the top of the hill, lifting her feet off the pedals and scuffing her heels along the road metal. Her knees were scabbed and her socks were baggy. She rode like a boy, her mother told her, and should know better for a young lady of nearly 15. "I dress like a boy too," thought Nell, wiping the curls out of her eyes with the back of her hand. This was the best spot. She could see the whole of Leadna Valley, her valley, from here. The lane that looped through tunnels of hawthorn and beech, the silvery River Chess, the glittering ford at Leadna Bottom. Without the clattering of the bicycle wheels, the rushing of air past her ears, Nell could listen to the day. Over in the copse, a wood-pigeon purred, and then a cuckoo piped, so cheerful and innocent-sounding for the wicked interloper that he was. She must tell Dad, so he could write it down in his notebook. The field of wheat behind the gate was turning to gold. Blazing scarlet poppies, paper light in the breeze, invaded its bounds. She saw a sunshine-yellow bird hop, pause, then flee into the sky. "Dad would know," she whispered, straining her eyes against the blue. "He'll know what sort of bird that is." She rested her bike on the ground and hooked her leg over the stile, pulled her knickers down and squatted in the pasture. As she peed, she watched the winsome sheep, now bereft of their lambs, chewing blank-eyed in the shade of the oak. "I hope you've forgotten your children already," she told them. "Otherwise it's—" Sitting back up on the stile, she drew an apple from her pocket and bit into it noisily. She drummed her feet on the crossbar. The valley was laid out peacefully below her, like one of her father's paintings. The sun sharpened the shadows, and the heat subdued the birds. A woodpecker hammered away in the wood, then fell silent. 3 miles away, behind banks of sultry trees and concealed by the bosomy curves of the fields, lay the village of Great Leadna, revealed only by a shimmering grey church spire. Beyond there, in a distance unimagined to Nell, eventually, lay London. She peered down the valley, shielding her eyes. There it was, her mother's car in miniature, coursing through the ford on its return from the station.